Have you ever stopped to think that one tiny ingredient can spark strong opinions the moment it shows up on the table? It's not politics, and it's not sports. It's food. More specifically, raisins. And here's something almost no one knows. Before becoming this ingredient that some people love and others can't stand, raisins go through one of the most curious and tightly controlled processes in the food industry. And it's far more complex than simply letting grapes dry in the sun. Now tell me something, and be honest. Are you the kind of person who likes raisins in your food? Or the kind who picks them out one by one before the first bite? To give you an idea, pounds and pounds of fresh grapes practically vanish to make a single pack of raisins. It's as if the fruit were compressed by time, heat, and industrial precision. And if you were impressed by our last episode, where we showed how a traditional food goes through massive stages before reaching the table, just wait until you see what happens to grapes before they become raisins. The comparison is unavoidable, and so is the impact. Welcome to the Factories and Facts channel. Here we show you the behind-the-scenes process that almost no one gets to see. Not just the polished product on the shelf, but the entire journey, from raw material to food ready to eat. And the question no one can stop asking is, why do raisins trigger such different reactions in people who eat sweets, fruit, and desserts all the time? Is it really the flavor or the context in which they appear? Before answering that, you need to understand how they're actually made. Because no, the industry doesn't toss old grapes in a corner and wait for them to shrivel up. There's strict selection, exact timing, humidity control, temperature control, and even major losses along the way. And throughout this episode, you'll discover why not every grape can become a raisin, what determines whether it stays light or turns dark, and the industrial detail that decides whether it will be soft or rejected at the very first bite. So take a moment now and subscribe to Factories and Facts, because if such a tiny ingredient can already spark this much debate, imagine what happens when you understand everything going on inside the factory. And stay with me because now we go back to where it all begins. The grape's still out in the field at the exact moment it stops being just a fruit and becomes the raw material behind one of the most controversial ingredients on the table. And we're already going to break the first classic myth. Raisins are not made from spoiled, old, or rejected grapes. In fact, the exact opposite is true. Before any conveyor belt, oven, tunnel, or shiny package on the shelf, raisins begin in the most underestimated place in this story: the vineyard. Because a lot of people think raisins are leftovers, forgotten fruit, grapes nobody wanted, and the industry just found a way to make use of them. But the truth is almost the opposite. For a grape to become a raisin and still taste pleasant, soft, sweet, with no off flavor, it has to start out better than many grapes sold fresh. And that makes sense. When grapes dehydrate, they lose water. And everything that remains becomes concentrated: sugar, acidity, flavor, aroma, and any flaw as well. In other words, a small mistake becomes a big problem. A bruised grape can turn into a raisin with an unpleasant taste. A grape harvested at the wrong stage can result in a raisin that's tough, acidic, or rubbery. And a grape with skin that's too thick can become the kind of raisin that sticks to your teeth and feels irritating. That's why selection matters. And it's not just visual selection. It's about variety, ripeness, and standards. The grapes most often used for raisins generally have 3 traits the industry values: high sweetness, thinner skin, and a strong ability to dehydrate without spoiling. And here's a detail that changes everything. Many grapes are grown specifically for raisin production. They were not meant to look perfect in a fruit bowl, but to handle everything that comes next. Now pay attention to this number. It's the first real shock of the process. To make 1 kilogram of raisins, you need 4 to 5 kilograms of fresh grapes. Think of it as intense compression. as if the grape were a balloon full of water and the industrial process pulled almost all of it out, until only a concentrate of sugar and flavor remain. The grape doesn't just shrink, it transforms. And that has an important effect. Cost and controlled losses begin even before the factory does. Because selection is already rigorous in the vineyard, and again when the grapes arrive at the receiving center. Grapes that are too small, bruised, split, showing signs of mold, or outside the standard, often never even make it into the main line. In the food industry, especially when the final product has to meet a commercial standard, anything outside that standard becomes lost, or is redirected to other uses. And then comes the most critical point of all, harvesting at exactly the right moment. The grape has to be ripe enough to have sugar and aroma, but it cannot be so ripe that it begins to ferment or becomes too fragile. It's a short window, and growers know that if they get it wrong here, there's no fixing it later in the factory. Raisins are not makeup. Dehydration reveals everything. Once harvested, it becomes a race against time. Grapes are alive. They breathe, they heat up, and they change. If they sit too long in the heat, packed too tightly or without ventilation, they begin to lose quality. So logistics become part of the industrial process. Proper crates, fast transport, organized receiving. It sounds like a small detail, but that kind of care is exactly what separates a soft, uniform raisin from one that's too dark, texturally compromised, or altered in flavor. And here's the question that changes the way you look at this product. If it takes this much work to get the grape right before dehydration, why do so many people still imagine raisins are just leftovers? Because the final product is small, and the human brain tends to confuse small with simple. But behind every pack, there was a vineyard, selection, a harvest window, transport, and control. Before we continue, let me ask you one quick favor. If you had no idea raisins went through all this, leave a like right now. That helps Factories and Facts reach more people who still think raisins somehow come ready-made from the store. And stay with me, because what comes next is even more fascinating. Now, we enter the heart of the industrial process, drying. And that's where you'll see there are different paths. And some of them almost look like tricks to anyone who doesn't know the process. This is the stage where the grape stops being fruit and officially becomes the raisin that so many people love and so many others avoid. This is where raisins earn their reputation as a controversial ingredient and at the same time become the target of the wildest theories. Because when you look at the package, it seems almost too simple. It's just a shriveled grape. And when something looks simple, the brain tries to fill in the story on its own. That's when the usual claims show up. It's old grapes. It's leftovers. It's loaded with chemicals. They let it rot and sold it. But the drying stage is exactly the most delicate part of the process, where one wrong decision can turn tons of product into loss. And it's in this phase that the grape loses most of its weight and still has to keep looking like food, not rubber. Before drying, the grapes go through a preparation stage that already determines half of the final result. Cleaning, removal of leaves, small stems, heavily damaged fruit, and anything that could contaminate the batch. And here comes a detail few people know. Grape skin has a natural layer that works almost like a shield against water loss. If you simply set the grapes out to dehydrate without control, the process can take far too long. And when it takes too long, the risk of fermentation, mold, and flavor changes rises sharply. That's why many processes use a controlled pre-treatment step to help water escape evenly. Think of it as if the grape were wearing a raincoat. You need to reduce that protection without destroying the fruit. If you overdo it, it splits and becomes a problem. If you get it right, it dehydrates evenly and becomes a soft raisin. From there are two main paths. And that choice changes the color, texture, and even the level of consumer acceptance. The first is controlled natural drying. Grapes spread out on trays or specific surfaces with calculated spacing, protection from contamination, and monitored airflow. It's not just leaving them in the sun. It means turning them, rearranging them, measuring, protecting, and monitoring time. Dry too fast, and the skin hardens while the inside turns oddly textured. Dry too slowly, and the door opens to losses. The second path is the one that makes the biggest impression at scale. Industrial tunnels and drying houses, where air moves like a giant hairdryer, only far more intelligent. The temperature and humidity are not there to cook the grapes, but to remove water at exactly the right pace. The goal is to reach a balance point, little enough water to provide stability and safety, but not so little that the raisin turns rock hard. Here comes the number that explains why raisins seem to disappear. To become raisins, grapes lose more than 70% of their mass, mainly through water loss. It's like compressing the fruit into a concentrated version of sugar, aroma, and acidity. And that crushes one of the biggest myths of all. Raisins last longer because they're loaded with preservatives. The main reason for their shelf life is simple and powerful. Without available water, most microorganisms struggle to grow. Dehydration by itself already works as a natural barrier. That doesn't mean there are no methods used to maintain color and appearance standards in some types of raisins. But the foundation of the process is physical. Remove water, concentrate, stabilize. And speaking of color, this is where the confusion between light and dark raisins begins. A lot of people think dark raisins are old or burned. In practice, the color is the result of time, oxidation, and method. The more exposure to oxygen and the longer the time under certain conditions, the darker they tend to become. Conditions that reduce browning or speed up certain stages can keep raisins lighter. The problem is that the consumer's brain associates dark color with past its prime. And it's in that emotional association that the controversy grows. It's not just about flavor, it's about perception. And now I want to bring you into this debate. Do you like raisins? And if you don't, is it because of the flavor? Or because of that too chewy texture? Or because they show up where you least expect them? Tell us in the comments, raisins yes or raisins no. We want to know what matters most in your opinion about this ingredient. And let's keep going, because now we move into the coldest and most rigorous side of the process. This is when the industry decides the fate of every single raisin. Grading and quality control. Machines and sensors spotting defects the human eye would never notice. And rejecting entire batches in seconds. That's when you understand why the package looks uniform. But behind the scenes, the selection is ruthless. After drying, raisins stop being shriveled fruit and become a product that goes through a true industrial trial. From this point on, they are under constant evaluation. And here begins the part few people imagine. Raisins do not go straight from the previous stage into the package. They enter a line where standards are law, and any deviation, no matter how small it seems, leads to automatic separation. This is where many people are surprised, because the process fully leaves the artisanal world behind and enters the territory of machine precision. No guesswork. No, this one looks fine. The very first thing that happens is physical sorting. The raisins pass through systems that separate them by size, shape, and weight. It may seem excessively strict, but it's a market requirement. When the consumer opens the package, they expect to see something consistent. If some are too small and others far too large, the perception of quality drops, even if the taste is acceptable. Then comes the machine's eye. Cameras and sensors analyzing color, sheen, and surface texture at high speed. And here lies an irony. Many people say raisins all look the same, but on the production line, the differences show up constantly. A raisin that is too dark may indicate oxidation beyond that batch's standard. A raisin that is too light may suggest incomplete drying. And a crushed raisin can become a texture problem the consumer notices immediately. And it's not just about appearance. There are safety steps designed to catch anything outside the expected range. unwanted fragments, particles, materials that do not belong in the food. On modern lines, this check is done automatically, with immediate detection and ejection. It's the kind of silent operation that protects the product, and that almost no one remembers when they call raisins simple. Here comes a small shock. Depending on the required standard, a huge amount gets diverted. Not necessarily for disposal, but into other categories, other industrial uses, mixes, or different standards. Because the package that reaches the market is not a portrait of the vineyard. It is a portrait of what made it through the most rigorous filter in the entire process. And there's more. Many lines also scan by batch, because a small defect repeated over and over may indicate a drying, transport, or storage problem. What's curious is that consumers rarely notice this level of filtering. They only notice when something goes wrong, when the raisins arrive hard, sticky, or with altered flavor. Then comes the packaging, which is not just a pretty wrapper. It has to protect against moisture and oxygen, because if the product reabsorbs even a little water, its texture and stability change. In other words, the industry dries, sorts, and then has to keep the environment from undoing all that work on the way to consumption. In the end, the well-presented package is a display window. The real backstage is an industrial sieve that only lets through what fits the commercial standard. And that's why raisins become such a curious case. Behind a tiny ingredient, there is a massive chain of decisions. But at the table, it all comes down to one simple, recurring question: do they go into the recipe or not? But now we answer the main point. Why do raisins still trigger such different reactions even with all this control? And here's a spoiler: the factory does its part. The real difference happens in memory, in expectation, and in the context in which they appear. After seeing the entire industrial journey of raisins, it becomes clear that the problem is rarely in the factory. The process is precise, controlled, standardized, and designed to deliver the same result every time. Even so, the moment raisins appear at the table, immediate rejection can follow. And that has far more to do with culture and psychology than with flavor. In many contexts, raisins almost never appear on their own. They are not the star. They show up mixed in, hidden, unexpected, especially in dishes where sweetness is not what a person expects to find. And the human brain hates food surprises. When you expect one thing and find another, the emotional reaction comes before the reasoning. It is not necessarily bad by definition, but it clashes with expectation. And there is a powerful psychological factor at play: control. Many people do not reject raisins themselves. They reject the feeling that raisins showed up there without warning. That is why some people pick them out one by one. It is not just removing an ingredient, it is reclaiming control over the dish. The raisin becomes a symbol of culinary intrusion, and then any recipe containing it can turn into fuel for debate. Now compare that with other contexts. In many places, raisins are used in a predictable and clearly stated way. In breads, cakes, cereals, fillings, and specific dishes where a sweeter flavor is already expected. In many culinary traditions, the combination of sweet and savory appears often, and no one discovers the raisin by surprise. It is already part of the agreement. You know what you are eating before the first bite. The debate grows when raisins show up in shared meals where the person is not building the plate alone. Someone serves, someone mixes, someone decides. Then the conversation stops being only about the ingredient and becomes almost a small conflict of preferences. And when that repeats itself in families, gatherings, or shared habits, the debate takes on an identity of its own. You are not just judging a food, you are choosing a side. And there is another detail that changes everything. When people taste small portions without knowing exactly where the raisins are, or without expecting a specific dish, rejection usually drops. That suggests that many times the trigger is not the flavor itself, but the surprise, intensified by the wrong context at the wrong moment. The ingredient ends up taking the blame for breaking an expectation that was already formed before the first bite. So, in the end, raisins are really a story about perception. The factory does its part. It dehydrates, standardizes, sorts, and delivers. The real dispute happens at the table. Tradition, emotional memory, control, and the old mix of sweet and savory that, for some, is charm, and for others, provocation. If after seeing all this you realize that the rejection of raisins may have more to do with context than with the ingredient itself, then the final question is direct. Do you like raisins or not? Tell us. And if you are enjoying this behind-the-scenes look and want more videos like this, subscribe here to the Factories and Facts channel because we still have many industrial secrets to show you. And leave a comment below telling us what surprised you the most. The industrial process, the psychological side, or the cultural controversy. And give us your verdict too. Raisins yes or raisins no? And if you think you have already seen it all, then maybe you still have not seen the process we showed in our last episode. It is already appearing on your screen. Click it and come with me to discover one more hidden secret here on Factories and Facts. A big hug. I will see you there.